On April 5th, Titanic sat quietly in berth 44. Absent were the busy and hectic scenes of the preceding day. With it being Good Friday, most of the workers and crewmen in Southampton had the day off and went home to celebrate. Only a skeleton crew of 10 remained on board to keep watch and look after the ship. The signal flags in which she was dressed the day before were gone, leaving only the blue ensign fluttering above her stern. Except for the occasional ringing of the bridge bell, signaling the watches for the few crew on board and the passing of the hours, all aboard was quiet. Titanic's wireless room was silent as well. Her 2 operators had practically no work to do before the voyage began, so they spent the majority of their time ashore. Senior operator Jack Phillips took advantage of the wonderful springtime weather and boarded a ferry down to the Isle of Wight for a daytime excursion. He'd have little chance to appreciate the sight on sailing day, as he'd be busy at work in the Marconi room. With the docks being practically deserted, there's no doubt that more photographers and locals took the opportunity to go see the ship up close. Amongst them was a photographer for the Southampton and District Pictorial. The newspaper was proud of Southampton being the home of Olympic and Titanic, featuring an illustration of them on the front page of every edition. Somehow, the photographer managed to get aboard and snapped a photo of her towering forward funnel, which would be published in the coming days. Work continued in full force on Saturday, April 6th, as men returned back to the ship. The final delivery of fittings had just arrived from the Dutch design firm HP Mutters & Zoon, ordered just a few days earlier. The shipment consisted of 24 tables and chairs that would populate the first-class reception room. During Olympic's maiden voyage, the reception room proved exceptionally popular with passengers, more so than expected. Finding that it lacked sufficient seating, changes were made to Titanic's design, and these extra chairs made sure no passenger would be left without a seat in which to relax and enjoy the music of the ship's band. Being a port city, Southampton was hit hard by the coal strike, and due to the layup of smaller ships, hundreds had been out of work for a long time. With Titanic's arrival, both the city's union halls and White Star's own hiring hall finally opened, and hundreds lined up, eager to get work on the new liner. Some were even handpicked by White Star due to their time and experience serving on Olympic. There were also just under 24 women who would be the ship's only female crew members. They included 18 stewardesses in first and second class, 2 cashiers for the first-class restaurant, 2 attendants for the ladies using the first-class Turkish baths, and finally, a matron who'd be looking after the passengers traveling in third class. It was a coincidence that the coal strike, which had put many of these men out of work, ended the very day they signed on to Titanic. With Parliament passing the Coal Mines Act of 1912, the workers had finally been granted the minimum wage protection that they'd gone on strike for 37 days previously. White Star was no doubt pleased at the news. They had planned to run Olympic and Titanic at reduced speeds to conserve fuel, but with the miners back to work, the coal trains would soon begin bringing a steady supply of coal, and their liners could carry out their express service at full speed. Meanwhile, away from the docks, the men, women, and children that made up Titanic's passenger list would have been preparing for their fast-approaching voyage. Many of the foreign third-class passengers were bidding farewell to their homelands and booking passage to the States, while wealthy Americans who'd been wintering in Europe and Egypt were congregated in France, finishing up their vacations and honeymoons by picking up the latest Parisian fashions. Others were just booking their tickets from the various White Star agencies scattered throughout Europe. A good portion of Titanic's passengers hadn't planned to sail aboard her at all, originally booked aboard the ships laid up in the harbor, such as Philadelphia, New York, and Oceanic. Though the strike had just ended, it would take some time to mine the fuel for these older liners to re-enter service. Many of these transferred passengers were more than happy to accept upgraded accommodation on the brand new Titanic. Easter Sunday brought another day of quiet loneliness to Southampton's docks. The end of the coal strike and Titanic's upcoming entry into service only added to the joyous atmosphere of the holiday celebrations across the city. The main breadwinners for hundreds of families would be returning to work, signaling the end of the hardships experienced over the past few weeks. With the voyage only 2 days away, work picked up rapidly. Painters scaled Titanic's huge funnels to apply a fresh, final coat of White Star buff. 2 teams of men carried out the task, with 2 funnels being painted at a time. As they were painting the 2 after funnels, they were photographed by a Mr. Thomas C. Pearson, who had taken the train from Bristol, traveling some 60 miles just to come see the ship. After photographing her stern, he walked along the dock and took a matching photo of the bow, both of which would be published as a single postcard once he got back home. Another visitor to the quay was First Officer William Murdoch's wife, Ada. Though her husband was occupied, she was given a guided tour of the new liner by one of his fellow officers. Meanwhile, trains full of provisions came rolling into the port to be loaded on board. The experience gained with Olympic over the past 10 months had made the process of ordering the right amount of goods for each voyage and loading it aboard much easier. And though Titanic's provisioning lists have been lost to time, studying the surviving copies of Olympic's lists can help piece together what was required for a maiden voyage.
Yes.
3,000 dozen fresh eggs, Titanic?
Yes.
It's all Titanic, this.
All Titanic.
One of them, C.G. Hibbert and Company, took the opportunity to photograph their hundreds of beer crates lying in the dock shed, waiting to be brought aboard, and proudly labeled as being for Titanic. Another more famous example comes from the Vinolia Company, who published ads letting travelers know that their soap would be supplied to Titanic exclusively for the use of first-class passengers.
For the first-class passengers, mark you. The rest don't wash, of course.
Along with all the provisions, perishable cargo such as cheese, fish, dried fruit, butter, oil, brandy, wine, champagne, along with hundreds and hundreds of bags of potatoes were loaded into the cargo holds. Items requiring refrigeration were put into the aft cargo holds near the ship's own provisions. The potatoes, however, got to enjoy an entire hold all to themselves. With all the cargo on board, the task of supervising the completion of the cargo plan fell to Second Officer Charles Lightholler. All in all, there was 559 tons of cargo, made up of 11,524 separate pieces and valued at 84,000 pounds or $420,000. A few of the most expensive and now famous items on board were a jewel-encrusted copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, made by the London firm of Sengorsky and Sutcliffe. It had been sold at auction by Sotheby's to Mr. Gabriel Wells, who was having it shipped to him in America on board Titanic. The most famous of all, however, is the red 1912 Renault Type CB Coupe de Ville owned by first-class passenger Mr. William Carter of Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Despite how it's often depicted, the car was crated and partially disassembled for the voyage to America. Mr. Carter's son later remembered that it was not in drive-off condition. Once the cargo manifest was complete, a copy was made and sent to Liverpool. 2 manifests would be getting shipped to New York, one on board Titanic herself, and in case of accident or total loss to the ship, the copy would be shipped on board Cunard's Mauritania. By the morning of April 9th, Titanic was practically finished, with only minor details left to complete, such as adding final touches of paint on the bow, cleaning the windows and portholes, and tidying up the interiors for her passengers. At 2 p.m., a telegram arrived from Liverpool confirming the reassignment of the ship's senior staff. Chief Officer Wilde would indeed be sailing on the maiden voyage, and Second Officer Blair would have to stay behind. A widower, Wilde wrote home to the nurse looking after his children, informing her of his posting, and sent £10 for the children's needs, saying he'd be back in around 18 days' time. He wrote, "Give the little ones my best love, and tell them I will come and see them as soon as I can." Once in Queenstown, he'd write to Jenny, his eldest daughter, telling her about Titanic, saying she was a very fine ship, and hoping she'd be able to come to Southampton to see her for herself once he was back. In the early afternoon, 2 press photographers arrived from London and came aboard to photograph the ship's interiors, capturing photos of the Titanic's gymnasium, swimming pools, and the lavish cooling room of the Turkish bath. They would also photograph the liner's bridge before disembarking. They'd stay in Southampton overnight, returning the following day to take more photos on sailing day. The officers likely paid little attention to the photographers milling about the ship, while Captain Maurice Clark, the Board of Trade's immigration officer, conducted his inspections. Clark had a reputation for being a real stickler for detail. Officer Lighthaller and the others considered him a nuisance, but his inspections of the life-saving equipment on board were important, so they set about their duties. The life jackets all through the ship were inspected, and davits were examined. The lifeboats all uncovered and turned out, their oars counted, rudders tried, and tanks inspected to see if all was in order. A stability test was also conducted. At sunset, after all the inspections and tests were done, a mule-drawn wagon rolled up the dock stacked high with palms, bamboo trees, and hundreds of colorful flowers including daisies, lavender, and roses. Leading the mule was Mr. Frank Beeling, accompanied by his son, Frank Jr. The Beelings' greenhouses had been supplying White Star ships with potted plants and flowers since 1907, and Titanic was just another liner that they'd been tasked with stocking. In her boarding entrance on D-deck, a tarp was spread out over the floor to stage the new plants. The D-deck reception room would need most of the palms brought on board, leading Titanic's passengers to lovingly nickname it the Palm Room. The veranda and palm courts on A-deck also received a number of palms, as did the reading and writing room and the restaurant reception room down on B-deck. A few flowers went to passengers' suites and staterooms to help mask the smell of Titanic's fresh paint.